Okay, so I wanted to hear from Noah and Quinn about what students should expect for the labs in this fall.
So, one thing that I really like about how the labs are set up is they're kind of designed to uncover the kind of black box that is the processor in various aspects. For example, one of the, if you've ever been wondering about how exactly a keyboard press goes from pressing a key all the way to the CPU, and then somehow the CPU knows that you press the key, exactly how does it work? Yeah. One of the labs deals with that kind of stuff. And the same with writing the screen. And so I really like how in this course, and especially in the labs, it kind of takes back the cover or unveils how the system works. And I've always been the kind of student that incessantly asks why, in the kind of annoying way. I'm like, but why does this work this way?
I remember that.
And it usually annoys the teacher or whoever.
No, it's great to have students like Noah and Quinn. You both were students that ask lots of questions when you are in the course. And, it's a sign of someone that's curious, right? That wants to know.
Right.
So Quinn, what do you think that the labs are going to bring to the students this fall?
So I think something along the line of what you're saying, Nelson. It really helps if you're curious. All of the labs introduce these big concepts that are not difficult to understand, but they're interesting concepts that you won't have ever seen somewhere else. You're never going to get a lab that asks you to implement a quick sort or a merge sort. That's not the kind of labs that we have here. Our labs are all a bit these ideas, these simulators that you have to implement, or you are implementing something that is done in the processor, and you learn about how it actually works by implementing it yourself. So I think that's something that's really special about the labs.
So another thing is that the labs are new, right? The labs, some of them are brand new. For example, the 3D lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell them a little bit about the 3D lab. What is new about that?
Could you clarify what you
mean? So it's a lab that talks about pandemic, right?
Yeah. So for this SIRD lab, it there's a way you can mathematically model pandemics or disease spreading, and so in this lab you kind of not to the perfect full extent, but to some extent you are simulating the spread of an infectious disease, and then you're incorporating stuff like timers, keyboard interrupts, and then the display, which doesn't sound like coming from Python, that doesn't sound the most insane thing. Mm-hmm. But what's so interesting is that in Python, when you write print or input, it
just goes up. It
just goes off, and even I don't fully understand how the Python interpreter works and how it perfectly translates to. But when you work through it from this approach, you see every single aspect through and through.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it also in learning it through this way, it helps translate to later on. Even if you don't do anything related to system architecture later on, when you use functions and you use really any type of programming later on in your career, having this background helps you understand exactly what's happening when you do these tasks. What's exactly happening when you use printf and C, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good interpretation of the lab. The reason I mentioned the SIRD lab is because, as an illustration to the student, that it's new. It has not been done before. We created it during the summer for this fall. Another lab that will be new for 329 is the WebAssembly lab, and we also have the Packet Forward lab. So Quinn, can you say a little bit about either of those labs? You can pick one.
Sure. I'll talk about the Packet Forward lab because that's the lab I'm working on right now. I'm just finishing up. I'm writing the marking scripts for that one. So what we did is we took an idea that we had stored from earlier back. I'm not sure when the idea was someone came up with the idea, but what we did is we wanted to have smaller labs so for this term because you're working at home, and so it's better to have smaller chunks that you can work on than what like a huge project. So for Packet Forward, we wanted to split up the lab into 2 parts, and so that's what we did. And the Packet Forward labs are about how routers send information to each other. And so you learn about these things called IP packets that are used to send this data. And so the first part of the lab is to calculate what's called a checksum to make sure that a packet that you get is good and it's not like invalid. And then the second part of the Packet Forward lab is about verifying the other aspects of the packet.
That's very good. And we're also going to have the WebAssembly lab. That's a lab that talks about this language. It's the assembly language for the web. So I think one of the things that I like to think about the way we design the labs in 229 is that the course is about computer architecture. And you do assembly programming so that you can understand how the software talks with the hardware. But then in the lab, when we design, we bring in new things that you learn because you're doing the exercise. So we are not simply implementing a table lookup to know how to do assembly. You end up learning about internet packets, you learn about interruptions and exceptions and such. You end up learning that there is this thing called WebAssembly that has been proposed by a number of companies and is used. So that's one of the things that we strive to do in the 229 labs.